Hi folks, my name is Joe Vozzelli. I'm the sports editor at the San Marcos Daily Record. I'd like to welcome you to our weekly show. I'm here with one of my colleagues, Ishmael Johnson. Of course, this week we started NFL football with a kickoff, and college football is in full swing. We're in the second week of that. Of course, Texas State was off this week, but we had a lot of action on the gridiron in terms of college football and also with the NFL. Primarily, though, we're going to be talking about sports around San Marcos, of course, with the San Marcos Rattlers and Texas State Bobcats. And we'll also be doing a preview of the upcoming opponents. Of course, Texas State has a big game against Navy this weekend. But first, we're going to go to a break really quick and come back and talk a little bit about the Bobcats and a little bit about the Rattlers. Welcome back, folks. We're first going to talk about the Texas State Bobcats. And you know, Ish, it was a great game for Texas State. They really put things together. What was impressive about that game for you?
Well, first of all, the first stat that jumps out is Tyler Jones, 278 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, 65-0. You look at the offensive stats, and it's kind of obvious, but you got to look at the defense as well. 0 points allowed. And another player that stood out to me was Japhis Gaines coming back from a season that was completely lost to, I believe it was an ankle, a broken ankle. So those are some of the players to me, Jones and Japhis Gaines, but I know there are others as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing about the Bobcats this year is they've got a lot of different players who are kind of stepping into new roles. Japhis Gaines, Damon Mercer in his first game catches a touchdown pass. And of course, they always have their old guys, their old standby guys, Robert Lowe and guys like that. But I think the most impressive thing was those new guys kind of stepping in there and really, I think, a surprise a little bit to some, be able to put up 65 points on a team. I know it's Arkansas Pine Bluff, and they're not the quality competition that they're going to see later in the year, but you're still talking about a really strong offensive performance. But you also kind of talked about it, the defense. The defense really stepped up a lot. What did you see out of those guys in the game?
See, starting out, it looked a little rough because the defense wasn't getting any pass rush, so it looked like, oh, those new guys coming in probably weren't going to get things done the way Coach Fran wanted them to. But near the end, Coach Thompson started sending a little bit more blitzes. The veterans, obviously Orakpo, Mayo, kind of coming in, helping out, shut down Benjamin Anderson, the quarterback from UAPB, who I want to add looked really good in that game. He really didn't have a lot of help. Looking at his stats, 8 of 19, 76 yards, 12 rushes for 73 yards. Okay performance when you consider that he was really kind of on an island talent-wise on that Golden Line offense. But, the pass rush was there once Thompson started sending the blitzes. The front four is going to have to get better if they want to play, if they want to step up against these bigger teams. But like you said, despite it being Pine Bluff, I thought it was still a very good performance because they only put up 28 on Prairie View last season. So.
Yeah, and it's going to be a big factor, too, looking forward, and we'll look into that against Navy. Those guys on the defensive line, there's a bunch of different pieces where Moko Odiari, that you've got Cree Berry, Marshad Dillon, a bunch of new pieces on that line that are going to have to step up big time and be a big factor against a Navy offense that, as we all know, is very difficult to stop, takes extreme discipline from really everyone on the field. But we'll get into that a little bit later, of course. Let's now go into a team that played this week, the San Marcos Rattlers. Of course, we were both there. I was shooting photos. Ish was up in the press box. But what do you think of that game? Of course, they ended up losing 43-27, but they did show some things that in that first week was a big factor as well.
Yeah, when you look at watching that game, one thing stood out. It was a battle of quarterbacks, athletic quarterbacks. David Hamilton, obviously, after his breakout performance last week against East Central, rushing for 387 yards. People were looking for him to be kind of a comeback, kind of have a similar performance this week. But I don't know if that defense was ready for Jonathan Ortega from Victoria East. Came out, he had an all-around stat line. He caught, I believe, 3 passes for about 50 or so yards, rushing 13 rushes for 161 yards, 7 of 10 passes for 132 yards, and even punted. Like that's what was funny in the press box. We were talking about this guy literally did everything. David Hamilton didn't have a bad game either. 14 of 23, almost 150 yards. He had about 200 yards on the ground. But just that 43, the San Marcos defense, the youth of that defense really showed in that game. They couldn't get a hold of Ortega, and even Bailey Zapp, I believe is his name, how do you pronounce his name, even came in for a couple snaps at quarterback. It's going to be a challenge for that defense. 56 points the first week, 43 points the second week, to see if they can. It was a lot of guys playing on that JV squad last year that are moving up to varsity. So it's going to be a challenge for them to see if they can boost up when they start playing these tougher teams in the district.
But you would imagine this week, with it being a bye week, is a huge factor for that defense. They're going to get a chance to really go into tape, look at what they were doing wrong, and kind of really to figure out what's been going wrong those first two games, because you can clearly see the offense has got a lot of talent with David Hamilton, Brandon Chapman, guys like that. They're going to put some points up on the board this year. The question is going to be defensively, can they figure some things out? There's definitely some talent there. Yeah. But at the same time, you're just not sure what we're going to see from those guys looking forward. And they're stepping into a tough district. I mean, in 2 weeks, they're going to start against Seguin, and then it really starts kicking up. You're talking about Alamo Heights, Kennedy, Tivy, teams like that. What do you think is going to be the factor that they're going to have to do defensively to kind of turn this thing around when they get into district play?
I think it just comes with experience. Getting more reps under these guys, getting more snaps under them. I believe Trey Wooten's leading the team in tackles, which we talked about before. If a secondary guy is leading the team in tackles, that means they're getting through that second level and forcing that last resort person like a safety or a corner like Trey Wooten to make that tackle. It's going to be up to him. It's going to be up to James Junick, a linebacker, to step up, be a mentor to some of these younger guys, because if you watch those first two games, you hear James Junick and you hear Trey Wooten's name over and over again, making these tackles, being the ones that are disciplined. But it's going to be up to those younger players, those juniors, those even some sophomores on the line to definitely step up and beat those top teams. Because when we were talking about the rankings, high school rankings for 5A, a lot of teams in the district were on that top 10 list. So, Bernie Champion's one of them. Tivy, like you said, John F. Kennedy. A lot of those San Antonio area schools are going to be tough challenges. And the offense, I don't think you have to worry about the offense. High school sports, you'll see those 40, 50-point games, and San Marcos, I think, can hang offensively, but they don't want to get in a 59 to 56 shootout with a Bernie Champion or with a Tivy.
Of course, they did have a little bit of a shorter week, 4 or 5 days to prepare. Maybe that was a factor. The other thing, too, is the sense that I get, the first game versus the second game, you're talking about two different kind of offenses. It seemed like to me, that the first game against East Central, it was more of a balanced offense. Yeah. And then, of course, they go against a team, last week against Victoria East, where they had to go against Ortega, and really he was the factor where he was a dual threat quarterback. So you're looking at two different kind of offenses. That's tough for a team early on to kind of prepare for that, especially when you got a short week to, only 4 days to prepare for a team like that. Yeah. Humid day, a lot of different factors that kind of went against them last week.
Yeah, it was very humid. I remember you were on the field most of the game for shooting shooting photos, but I came down there for the last couple minutes to get the interview with Soto, and I was already sweating 5 minutes stepping on the field. The dual quarterback system definitely threw a wrench in game planning. Zap and then Ortega coming in, kind of, I believe Zap 20 attempts, Ortega with 10 attempts. So they almost split a lot. Ortega had a lot more designed run plays for him, but that's going to throw a wrench in it. Coach Soto knew that they were going to run a dual quarterback system, but you can only. I don't think they were expecting what they got from Ortega. And that's not a slight against the coaches at all. I don't think anybody expected that, including probably Victoria East, who, saw something in training camp, but I think he showed something that Thursday night. So,
speaking of dual threat quarterbacks, when you're talking about a dual threat quarterback next week against Navy with Keenan Reynolds, what he's going to be able to do, this is going to be an interesting game to watch. I think when everyone kind of looked at the schedule ahead of the season and saw who Texas State was playing, everyone kind of pointed to Navy as that could be a game that could go either way. You're talking about a really tough team, they play quality opponents at the beginning of the year, Ohio State to start things off, and then last week against Temple, barely survived against Temple. It was a really interesting game to kind of watch the last quarter of it. They were up, when that offense is up by 14 points, you're expecting the game to be over. Yeah. What ended up happening, Temple almost comes back on them. They got a chance at the end of the play. Their quarterback ends up doing 2 laterals to offensive lineman. The offensive lineman fumbles the ball, goes up in the air, and Navy wins the game on that kind of play. So I don't think they were expecting to win the game, but they still came away with a victory to even up their record. And now Texas State has them this weekend. It's going to be a tough game. And really, from what I've been talking to the players and whatnot, this is going to be an important week for the scout team offense.
Yeah.
You know, everyone talks about scout team offenses and how important it is, and everyone, maybe it's not that big of a deal for a fan's perspective, but from a player's perspective, they always talk about how important that is. Since, you know, do you think there's any way to kind of simulate what Keenan Reynolds can do out there?
See, I think it goes back. I remember a story when back when Texas was in the national championship game. USC was using, I believe, Fred Davis to mimic Vince Young. You know, like trying your best to get an athlete that resembles the other team's dynamic athlete. Fred Davis, obviously the tight end, he's not going to mimic Vince Young. I don't know if we're going to see a quarterback, even if they put somebody like Robert Lowe or somebody from that offense to mimic Keenan Reynolds. I don't think he can do that, and that's going to be the thing. You have to just practice assignments. You know, you can't practice this quarterback's going to be this fast. You just got to practice. All right, Arakpo, you got the quarterback. You know, Mayo, you got the quarterback. No matter what he does, you have to have a backup plan just in case, because, you know, Connor White's not going to be able to simulate Keenan Reynolds. Fred Nixon's not going to be able to simulate Keenan Reynolds, and it's going to be down to assignments. That's how you stop triple option football. You know, two guys can't key in on one player. Linebackers have their assignments. Corners have their assignments. I don't know if you can mimic it, but you can be sure that you're covered in case something comes at you.
Of course, Craig Mager, who's a senior, he played those guys 2 years ago. He basically told me point blank, there's no scout team in America that can prepare for what Navy does. So it's all about discipline. Like you said, you got 11 guys out there. They each have their assignment. They can't deviate from their assignment, because anyone that you talk to, any coaches that you talk to, you can stop that offense for 35 plays. And 5 plays you don't stop them, they're all touchdowns. Yeah. You know, any other offense you go against, maybe 5 plays, they might break it for 10, 15 yards. If they break contain, you know, for Navy, they're going to go for 60 yards in a cloud of dust. Yeah. So, you know, Texas State's going to have to be very careful discipline-wise. The interesting thing from talking to Coach Fran is they plan on keeping the same philosophy on offense. Mm-hmm. They're not going to change philosophies. A lot of coaches might say, well, let me try to slow the game down, prevent Navy from getting on the field. Coach Fran has said they're going to keep that up-tempo offense rolling along and see what they can go with. They're going to roll with it. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. If it does, it does. So I think that's an interesting philosophy, because, as you know from the first week, that up-tempo offense really did a great job of getting things going and really threw UAPB for a loop. They really couldn't match.
Yeah, I don't think UAPB was expecting what they got, because I was clocking it at one point. It was 15 seconds, 20 seconds in between snaps. So it was definitely a very good change in philosophy from Francione, who's typically been huddle up, you know, and it's from his days at Alabama to A&M, huddle up, you know, control the clock, be, you know, 3 yards in a cloud of dust type of running style. Definitely a change in philosophy for him, almost a 180. It was really cool to see what they did there. I think it's good that he's sticking with it, because you can't change week to week. You have to make the opponent adjust to you. You can't adjust to your opponent. Especially when Navy's defense isn't necessarily their strong point. You have to make them adjust to your team, and I think it's smart that Franchione's doing it that way.
Yeah, and even against Temple, I mean, I think 400 yards they gave up, and they looked questionable at times defensively. So I think there's some potential there for Texas State to score some points on Navy. And really, the thing about this up-tempo that I've been really impressed with, they've got a lot of guys that are speed guys. Yes. C.J. Best, Damon Mercer, Japhis Gaines, guys that can really, when they're in space, can create problems for the opposing defense. And so I think that's what's going to be a big factor for them this entire year, is getting those guys to kind of fit into the philosophy, work well, and really keeping those guys fresh, which in an up-tempo offense, you've got to keep the guys fresh. You got to manage those reps. You've got to be able to figure things out. And kind of was a little bit of surprise to me, but even, Francione was saying after the game, he felt like their stamina wasn't as well as he'd liked it to have been at the end of that game. And obviously, they looked, from looking at it from the press box, it wouldn't have looked like that. But all of a sudden you go up into the press, you watch the game and you don't, you're not expecting what happened out there. So we're going to, unfortunately, folks, we're going to have to wrap it up really quick here. I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in and watching the show. We'll be here every week to present you with information about the San Marcos Rattlers and, of course, the Texas State Bobcats coming out on Monday. Talk to you later, folks.